Last year, 31,000 Australians walked away from the big cities for good, net. More left for the regions than came back by tens of thousands. And among them was a particular group whose move mattered more than anybody's. The retirees. Where they went, why they went, and what actually happened when they got there. It's a map. A map drawn by thousands of people that you can read before you make the same move yourself. Today, we read it. We went through the Bureau of Statistics migration data, the Regional Movers Index, the destination figures, the real numbers behind the headlines. Because for a retiree, this is the biggest, least reversible move there is. Get it right, and it's the best decision of your retirement. Get it wrong, and there may not be a way back. 31,000 people just ran that experiment. You don't have to run it blind. And here's the uncomfortable part. The headlines all tell the same warm story. Australians escaping the rat race, chasing the coastal dream. But the data tells a second story underneath it. A lot of these people didn't move because they wanted to. They moved because they could no longer afford to stay. The dream move and the priced out move pull up in the same removal truck. They do not end the same way. Quick, honest note. This is market analysis, not financial or property advice. Speak to your own professional before a move this big. So let's start with that number, because I want to be straight with you about it. 31,000 is the net figure for all ages, leaving the capitals for the regions in a single year. Retirees are only a slice of that. In fact, older Australians are the least likely of any age group to move at all. Most stay put, and rightly so. So why give them a whole video? Because when a retiree does move, it's the heaviest move of their life. The home, the savings, the community, the distance from care, all at once. The young family that gets it wrong rents somewhere else next year. The retiree who gets it wrong can lose a chunk of their capital and their health in one go. Small group, enormous stakes, and the move itself is no fad. Since the pandemic, the flow out of the cities has run about 20% above the old normal, every single quarter, with people leaving for the regions outnumbering those coming back by a quarter. Sydney and Melbourne are losing the most. The Bureau calls it structural, not temporary. This is a tide, not a wave. And for most of them, the pitch is the dream we all know. Sell the city house, buy the coastal cottage or the country block for half the price. Pocket the difference, slow the pace down, breathe. The sea change, the tree change, the reward at the end of a working life. But sit with that second story for a second. Because for a growing number of these movers, the truck wasn't packed with a dream. It was packed with a defeat. The council rates that kept climbing. The insurance that doubled. The cost of simply existing in a major city on a fixed income. They didn't choose the regions. The city evicted them, slowly, with a calculator. So before we follow them out to where they landed, one question has to come first. Who actually moved, and can we even trust the picture the headlines paint? Because the story everyone's telling about this exodus, and what the data actually shows, are two very different things. So is it real? Did 31,000 people really leave? Yes. That part isn't in doubt at all. The hard data is solid. The Bureau of Statistics has the capitals losing around 31,000 people, net, to the regions in a single year, Sydney and Melbourne bleeding the most. And the Regional Movers Index, a quarterly read built from millions of real bank account address changes, backs it up. People leaving the cities for the regions are outnumbering those moving back by about a third. And the whole flow is running over 50% above where it sat before the pandemic. This isn't a COVID hangover that's fading. 5 years on, it's still running hot. The experts have stopped calling it a trend and started calling it structural. The exodus is real. But here's where I have to be honest with you. In a way, the other videos on this won't be. Because somewhere out there is a video with a big, confident number. 20,000 retirees did this, 30,000 seniors did that, and I want you to know something. Nobody actually has that number. The Bureau doesn't break these movers down cleanly by age. There is no official table that says how many of the 31,000 were retirees. So anyone who hands you a precise figure is doing one of two things, guessing or selling. We're not going to do either. Here's what we genuinely know. Older Australians are the least likely people in the country to move. Fewer than 1 in 100 over 65s pulls up stumps and moves interstate in a given year. Most stay exactly where they are, and for most of them, that's the right call. So of those 31,000 movers, retirees are a slice, a minority, not the headline. But small does not mean unimportant, it means concentrated. When a 30-year-old moves, it's a chapter in a long story. When a 70-year-old moves, it's the last move, the one that decides where they'll grow old, where they'll be when their health turns, how far help is when they finally need it. The stakes don't shrink with the numbers, they explode. So we're not here chasing a big crowd. We're here studying a small group making the highest stakes bet of their lives because their wins and their mistakes are the cheapest lessons you will ever get. And on one thing, the data is not vague at all. It is razor sharp. It knows exactly where this flow is going. And it is not where you'd guess. The single biggest surge wasn't to a glamorous beach at all. It was to a quiet border city most Australians couldn't place on a map, where arrivals from the capitals jumped 16-fold in a single year. That's where we go next. Because where they're landing tells you more than any brochure ever could. Albury, a border city on the Murray, halfway between Sydney and Melbourne, that most people drive straight past. In the year to June 2025, the number of people moving there from the capitals didn't just rise, it jumped 16-fold. 16 times. And ask yourself why. Not for the surf, there isn't any. Not for the glamour, there isn't much. People are pouring into Albury for the things that don't photograph well but matter enormously when you're older. It's affordable. It has a proper base hospital. It has real shops, real services, and it sits exactly halfway between two capital cities, so your family in either one can reach you in a few hours. The data's single loudest signal in 2025 wasn't a postcard. It was a workhorse. And Albury isn't the exception, it's the pattern. When you follow the whole flow, it isn't draining into sleepy little beach villages. It's pouring into regional centers, places with hospitals, jobs, and services right across regional, New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria. Geelong, a full city in its own right, an hour from Melbourne. The Sunshine Coast, yes, but even that's a serviced region with hospitals, not a quiet hamlet. The people leaving the cities aren't running to the middle of nowhere. They're trading one service place for another, cheaper one. But look closer, and the destinations split into two very different types. On one side, the affordable workhorse centers your Alburys, your Geelongs, the regional hubs where the dollar stretches and the hospital is close. On the other, the lifestyle magnets, the Sunshine Coast, the pretty coast where the dream is absolutely real, but the price has quietly caught up to the very city they left. Two kinds of destination, and which one a retiree chooses tells you almost everything about whether they move towards something they wanted or away from something they could no longer afford. And keep this honest, these are the overall flows. Retirees are riding inside them, not steering them. But where the tide goes, older Australians largely go too, because they're chasing the same two things everyone else is. A dollar that goes further, and a town that still works when life gets harder. So that's where they went, which leaves the question that actually decides everything. Why? Why would anyone uproot an entire life at 65 or 70 and start again 2 states from home? There turn out to be only 2 real reasons, and the first one is the one everybody's happy to admit to. The first reason is the dream, the one everybody's proud to say out loud, and it stands on 3 pillars. The first is simply the life, the garden you never had room for, the quiet that replaces the traffic, the walk by the water before breakfast, the slower mornings after 50 years of fast ones. For most of these movers, the regional town isn't a retreat, it's the reward, the thing the working life was supposed to buy. The second pillar is the money, and it's the most rational reason on the entire list. You sell the city house at a city price, you buy the regional one for less, and you keep the difference. The research is consistent. Around 6 in 10 retirees who relocate move somewhere cheaper, and they typically free up something like $100,000 by doing it. And for a retiree, $100,000 isn't a holiday, it's a decade of breathing room, a buffer for the years when the bills only climb. Done right, this one move can fund a chunk of the retirement itself. And the third pillar is the people, specifically the small ones, being closer to the kids and the grandkids. It's one of the top 3 reasons retirees give for any move the pull of being 20 minutes from the school pickup instead of a 2-hour flight away. For a lot of people, no garden and no equity could ever compete with that. And here's the part I'm glad to tell you, because this channel doesn't only deliver bad news. When the move matches the expectation, the payoff is genuinely beautiful. Retirees who land well report more of the things a good life is actually made of: time outdoors, shared meals, a community that knows their name. That's not a brochure line. That's the real reward, and plenty of people collect it. But each of those 3 pillars has a crack running through it, and you need to see them before you pack. The equity only appears if the new town is genuinely cheaper and the prettiest sea change spots have quietly caught up to the city you're leaving, shrinking that 100,000 to nothing. The family move can curdle, the relocation built on love can slowly become unpaid childcare, or the kids take a job interstate a year later and leave you stranded where you landed. And the well-being gains? They only arrive if you actually integrate. The dream quietly assumes you'll find your people. Not everyone does. So that's the dream. And for the retiree who plans it with clear eyes, it's real and it's earned. But the dream is only half of why 31,000 people moved. Because for a growing number of them, none of this was the reason at all. They didn't move toward the garden. They moved away from a bill they could no longer pay. And that second reason is the one almost nobody says out loud. The second reason is the squeeze. And almost nobody says it out loud because it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like a defeat. Here's what it looks like. The house is paid off, you did everything right, but the cost of simply keeping that house in a major city never stops climbing. The council rates, up again. The home insurance, up faster, sometimes doubling. The energy bills, the everyday price of existing in a capital on a pension that barely moves. You're not broke. You're just being slowly squeezed out of the only suburb you've ever known. And one day the math stops working, and you put up the sign not because you wanted to leave, but because you could no longer afford to stay. And this is the most important thing in this entire video, because on the moving truck, those 2 retirees look identical, but they are not the same. One did the sums, chose the town, planned the landing, they moved towards something. The other got priced out, grabbed the cheapest place they could afford, and moved away from something, often without ever checking the hospital, the distance, the real cost on the other side, and the ending split hard. The planner tends to thrive. The squeezed one tends to land in trouble, because a move made in a financial panic skips the exact checks that make a move work. And here's the cruelty folded inside it. The retiree who moves because they can't afford the city is the one who can least afford to get it wrong, and the most likely to. They can't afford the trial stay. They can't afford to be fussy. So they take the cheap house in the cheap town. And the cheap town is cheap for a reason. Thin services, far from care, a market they may not be able to sell out of. The squeeze that pushed them out quietly sets up the second move they really cannot afford. And this is where the money turns genuinely treacherous. Because the move that was meant to relieve the squeeze can quietly deepen it through your pension. Free up a lump of equity, and that cash can cut your age pension. Rent instead of buy, and you flip to a non-homeowner with rent assistance and a completely different set of rules. The squeeze, the equity, and the pension are all knotted together, and getting one wrong can cost you more than the whole move ever saved. That's a calculation all of its own, and we run it dollar by dollar on our channel, Aussie Senior Finance. So those same 31,000 people hold both stories at once, the dreamers and the displaced, the ones who moved toward a garden and the ones who moved away from a bill. And what separated a happy ending from a hard one was never the reason they left. It was whether they planned the landing. Which brings us to the only question that really matters. What actually happened to them both kinds once the truck was unpacked and the dust settled? Who thrived? Who came running back? Because that answer is the most useful thing in this whole story, and it's where we go next. So what happened to them? The honest answer is 2 numbers that don't seem to belong in the same sentence. In the biggest Australian survey of people who'd made the move, 94% said they were happy they did it. 94. A near landslide of satisfaction. And yet sit with this, around 2/3 of them were planning to move back, happy with the move and leaving anyway. How can both of those be true at once? Statements. They loved the change. They simply discovered the place couldn't go the distance. And the reasons they gave are the exact 6 measures from our last video, coming back to collect. Missing the family they'd left behind. Services thinner than the daydream promised. The quiet gap between the holiday they remembered and the wet Tuesday in July they now lived. And for older movers, the trigger is specific. It's rarely boredom. It's the body. Health needs change. And overnight, the lovely town is too far from the care you now need, or too far from the children who now have to help you get it. The move that fit perfectly at 67 quietly stops fitting at 76. But let me be fair, because the data is genuinely encouraging. When the move works, it really works. Australians who moved to the regions recorded a real, measurable lift in life satisfaction, and it held years down the track. And the people leaving the cities tend to be older and better resourced, exactly the kind of people who plan well and land well. So this isn't a cautionary tale, it's a conditional one. The condition is everything. So what actually separates the retiree who thrives from the one who comes running back? It isn't luck, it isn't even the town. It's 4 things the thrivers did before they ever moved. They checked the health, the hospital, the doctors, the specialists before they let themselves fall in love. They planned their way into the community, joined the club, volunteered, found their people on purpose instead of waiting for the town to hand them friends. They did the real money maths every ongoing cost, not just the headline house price gap, and they never once assumed regional meant cheaper. And they kept a real line to family close enough, or a genuine plan to bridge the distance. Do those 4 things, and you land, overwhelmingly, in the 94% who are glad they came. Skip them, and you drift into the 2/3 who are quietly boxing it all up again and paying, a second time, for the privilege. Which means this whole story was never really about where to move. It was about how. How to move so that you land in the right half of those numbers and stay there. And that how isn't a mystery. It's the exact process the thrivers used, and you can copy it step by step. That's where we finish. The thrivers didn't get lucky. They followed a process. And it comes down to 4 moves you make before the truck is ever booked. First, and this is the lesson the whole video has been driving at, move towards something, never away from something. The retirees who thrived were running to a life. The ones who struggled were running from a bill. So if it's the squeeze pushing you, the rates, the insurance, the cost of the city, stop before you list a thing. Fix the squeeze where you can, or plan the move properly. Never let a financial panic choose your last hometown for you. A move made in fear skips every check that makes a move work. Second, rehearse it before you commit to it. Remember that survey, 94% happy, 2/3 packing to leave again? Almost every one of those boomerang moves could have been a rental instead of a purchase. So rent first. Live there through a real season, not a holiday the gray July, the dead quiet midweek. Let the town show you its ordinary face before you hand it your capital. The trial that costs you a few months' rent saves you the $50,000 to $80,000 second move. Third, plan your way into the community on purpose. This is the one almost nobody prepares for. The thrivers didn't wait for the town to deliver them friends. They joined the club. They volunteered. They showed up in the first month before the loneliness could set in. Because the single biggest reason good moves go sour isn't the house or the hospital, it's the quiet. A beautiful town where you know nobody is just a beautiful, kinda lonely. Walk in with a plan to belong. And fourth, run the money, all of it, before you sign, not just the house price gap. Every ongoing cost, the insurance, the travel back to the city for the specialists, the trades, the things that quietly make cheaper, not cheaper. And run it past the one thing that changes everything, your pension. 31,000 people made this move last year. The ones who'll still be glad in 10 years aren't the ones who found the prettiest town. They're the ones who treated this like the biggest project of their lives and planned the landing as carefully as the leaving. Do that, and a regional move can be the best years you've got. Skip it, and it's the most expensive lesson you'll ever buy. And there's one last thing the 31,000 can't tell you. The piece that decides whether this move actually fixes your finances or quietly wrecks them. Because if you're moving to ease the squeeze, you need to know if it works on paper. Free up equity to buy cheaper, and that cash can cut your age pension, so the rates you save get swallowed by the pension you lost. Rent instead, and your whole assessment changes again. The move that looks cheaper can leave you worse off, or far better off, depending entirely on the pension maths. We run that before and after, dollar by dollar, on our channel Aussie Senior Finance. The link's right here. Do that calculation before you list the house, not after you've moved.